DreadOut is a horror game from the land of Indonesia, a country that is not known for their video games, but that doesn't matter because everyone has to start somewhere, and the fine developers over at Digital Happiness decide that the best way to introduce their culture to the digital world would be to showcase all the disturbing creatures that allegedly inhabit their land. Taking a pretty hefty amount of inspiration from Fatal Frame, DreadOut places you in the role of Linda, an Asian schoolgirl that, like many other Asian schoolgirls, has found herself at the center of a paranormal mystery that threatens both her life and the lives of her friends. Armed with nothing but a smartphone with the world's best battery life, she must do battle with a rogues gallery of photo-shy spirits and rescue her now demonically possessed friends. I hope you're ready to trudge through dimly lit swamps and skulk around rundown buildings because the intro is over and now it's time to... One of the things that I think is really neat about game development becoming more accessible to people is that it's allowed people from basically all over the world to get chances to try their hand at game development and put their stuff out there for people to play. I don't think it's any secret that game development is hard and expensive, and it's only getting worse as the technology behind a lot of it gets increasingly expensive and energy intensive. This has traditionally served as a barrier of entry for most of the world's population, but significant work has been taken up to let more people make the game of their dreams, whether it be a fast-paced first-person shooter or puzzle-based hentai game. One of the most famous and infamous examples of this kind of initiative is Kickstarter, a crowdfunding website that was initially met with enthusiasm, but now largely elicits eye rolls whenever it gets brought up due to the amount of scams, broken promises, and dead projects that eventually overran the platform. That's not to say everything that came from this was a dud. We got some good shit like Pillars of Eternity, Pathologic 2, and oh shit, what do you know, the thing I'm going to be talking about today, DreadOut. DreadOut is a survival horror game that takes some pretty heavy inspiration from Fatal Frame, but has one pretty big difference. Fatal Frame was Japanese, DreadOut is Indonesian. If you're an uncultured American, you've probably never heard of Indonesia, since it's a country that has managed to largely, but not entirely, avoid a lot of the political instability that cropped up in Southeast Asia in the aftermath of World War II. Super quick history lessons. Indonesia is a collection of islands and archipelagos situated in the southeastern part of Asia and the northern part of Oceania. They were a Dutch colony for a few hundred years, but owing to geography and rebellious attitudes of the people that were native to the area, they were never able to gain a very strong foothold on it like a lot of other European colonies. Eventually, the Japanese did that thing they were doing in the first half of the 20th century and kicked them bitches out and took over for a bit, and then us Americans took that picture with the flag and won the war, so they left too, and now Indonesia finally gained independence, at which point this guy took over for a bit until he got kicked out by this guy, who was kind of a dick, and now they have elections and shit, and that's where my knowledge of the area pretty much ends. DreadOut isn't really concerned with the history of the country, though. It's primarily focused on its folklore, which is expectedly filled with a bunch of spooky-ass monsters that are straight-up nightmare fuel. One of the defining aspects of Indonesian culture, at least from my American perspective, is the religious and spiritual aspects of it. Indonesia is a predominantly Muslim country. Matter of fact, it's actually the most populous Muslim country in the world, which often confuses Westerners because we see pictures of people from here and we're like, they ain't Muslim, they ain't wearing the thing, but listen, you racist fuck, I'm trying to explain it. See, Islam came to Indonesia like a billion years ago in the 700s and actually overlaid, rather than supplanted a lot of the traditional indigenous religious practices, which has resulted in a unique form of Sunni Islam that is practiced here today, where the Quran and teachings of Muhammad kind of coexist with all this weird shit that's in the game. It kind of reminds me of how a lot of people in Latin America are turbo-Catholics, but they still do stuff like Dia de los Muertos and honor Pachamama and that kind of thing. Or like in America, where half the country worships Jesus and the other half worships Taylor Swift. Now that I've flexed my history degree that I don't have because I dropped out of tech school, I think it's probably pertinent to start talking about the video game. Like I said earlier, this bitch was funded on Kickstarter back in the day for the steep price of $29,000, which is like a fucking fraction of the budget of pretty much every game from crowdfunding back then. By the way, I've been saying Kickstarter this whole time, and it was actually on Indiegogo, so yeah, I'm done. I just spread misinformation online. Snopes has already sent a team to my house to execute me. Goodbye, everyone. So anyway, these guys took the pocket change that people tossed at them and made a whole fucking horror game on the Unity engine, which was probably milked for all it was worth by Let's Players who probably made more money off of those videos than the devs did off of sales. If you forego watching people scream at the game and decide to scream at it yourself, you'll find a game that has a fair amount of jank, some weird design, really good atmosphere, and groundwork to be built off of in future efforts. One of the first things that I saw a lot of people say about this game is that it looks cheap, which it does, because it is. Again, $29,000. In addition to this, a developer on the game said that Indonesia does not have much of a development industry, and what is there is primarily focused on mobile games. So the goal with DreadOut was not just to get the team's foot in the door, but also hopefully gain enough momentum to set the stage for a broader game development scene within the nation. Looking at it from that perspective, I can overlook some low-quality textures and the simplistic UI and appreciate the game for what it's trying to be, not a AAA extravaganza, but a small-scale experiment in game design that is basically just a bunch of people finding their creative footing and making something that they think is interesting. First things first, I appreciate that DreadOut is an actual game. It would have been so easy for these guys to just do what everyone else was doing at the time and make a boring-ass walking sim where you just hold the W key and listen to moody narration, or the guy from Mad Men hit on some girl over a radio. Instead, these guys were like, hey, you know what people really like in video games? Game mechanics, and so they actually put a few in there. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing that's super in-depth here, but there's some fun puzzles and spooky encounters with ghosts. It's definitely amateur, but I really admire the devs' clear willingness to experiment with their capabilities and try and make use of the things that games have to offer as a medium, rather than just hiding their lack of experience behind art house pretensions and getting plastered with awards for it anyway. Speaking of which, both of these games came out in the same year, and guess which one was filleted nonstop by news outlets and which one was not? Can you guess? I don't have an axe to grind, I promise, B. We're all cultured individuals here. We're open-minded men and women of the world. Let's continue to ignore foreign media made for a fraction of the cost but twice the passion, and continue to give handshakes to West Coast hipsters who think that a nation's history and heritage can be distilled into a fucking coffee cup. I am unhinged and need help. The story of DreadOut is that you're part of some high school class that's going on a field trip or something, but y'all get lost and end up in an abandoned town that's haunted by pretty much every ghost, wraith, demon, and ghoul in the whole nation. Your character, a girl named Linda, gets separated from the rest of the group and has to navigate the city and survive against the malevolent entities that are roaming the streets. The game opens up with this nightmare sequence or something that pretty much immediately throws you into the shit with bizarre imagery and a really lame jump scare that still got me because I'm a huge pussy. I don't know if y'all caught that, but the camera freaked out because I jumped and nearly sent my mouse across the room. So you wake up and everyone's in a minibus or something. What the fuck are they doing back there? You got Linda, the main character, her best friend Ira, Shelly, a kid named Donnie, some dude whose name I completely forgot, and the teacher, Miss Siska. These may seem like a cast of supporting characters, but in actuality they all fuck off pretty quick and you spend most of the game alone, which is pretty standard for a survival horror game since it's a whole genre built off of isolation. There's also this road that you can go down at the very beginning, and I actually spent like 20 minutes trying to get to the end of it, but eventually I just said fuck it and turned around. You cross the river and enter this abandoned town where your group finds a rundown school and they go in without you and Ira, who try to fucking strangle each other. Maybe it's a cultural thing. Then it gets dark, y'all two go in and Ira disappears. Cue start of the game proper. One thing I forgot to mention is that the dream sequence at the beginning was Act 0, whereas the road and the school are Act 1. As you can probably guess, based on the background footage, it was a fairly ominous establishment, definitely not conducive for adolescent learning, especially when shit like this happens.
Lynn! Linda!
Linda, what took it up? Where are you, right? Dying.
Yeah, if I went to this school, I'd drop out real fucking quick. You get introduced to the first few real deviants that this game throws at you, which includes some ghost lady, a giant pig with a human head, which I found profoundly upsetting, and this bitch in a red dress that's kind of like the final boss for the chapter. Aside from these encounters, most of this section is focused on exploration. There's a lot of rooms in the school, and it has a really confusing layout that I'm not sure is architecturally sound, but I also mispronounced the word cochlear in my Cold Fear video, so I'm probably clinically brain dead. Basically, your main goal here is to exit through the back door of the main hall, and obviously you need to find a key to do that, which requires you to search a lot of rooms, solve a puzzle that I have absolutely no idea how the fuck you're supposed to figure it out, and fight a non-2020s approved boss in this hidden daycare or something. Act 2 is longer and more set-piece driven, with the greatest amount of gameplay between all three acts. There's a neat dichotomy between the action-focused parts of this act and the slower puzzle sections, and whatever they were going for here. The funniest moment I had in this part of the game was probably this boss fight with, I don't even know what the hell you're supposed to call this thing. For the most part, the fight is straightforward, but it progressed to this point where the dude just kept grabbing me and snapping me like a twig over and over. I couldn't pause the game, so I just said, fuck it, left the game running while I googled what the hell I was supposed to do here. And right as I found out that the solution was to not do anything, not press any buttons and let the thing think you were already dead, that solution played out while I had my browser open, so I beat this boss without even having the game open, which I thought was pretty entertaining. As far as the story goes, pretty much everything that's of actual narrative importance happens in this act. Donnie gets possessed by a spirit and chases you through a shantytown before he gets the old neck snap. You find Shelly and Miss Siska, you go and leave them behind to do some exploring, but when you return, Shelly is dead and Miss S is over and out. That other dude from the beginning of the game is just sort of gone and never gets mentioned again, and Ira has been possessed by some fucked up doll that you have to play the spookiest game of 20 questions with. Aside from some of the spooky shit that I've already talked about, you go up against these little goblin bastards that try to cop your phone, a poltergeist that tosses all this shit around, this spooky mirror puzzle that took me forever to figure out, and this leaping ghost chick that was a surprising amount of fun to deal with. This all caps off in the final sequence where you discover some hidden bedroom in the mansion where you have this encounter, which I found greatly upsetting. I didn't even jump at this part or even really get scared. This shit just bothered me. But after this scene, you get transported back to the school where you have one final encounter with the red ghost lady. This is actually a surprisingly complex battle. It's like a really extended puzzle sequence where you have to deal with all this clever shit that the ghost tries to pull on you, like this part where you're floating in a void, but there's actually all these invisible halls that you have to navigate using your phone's camera. Really clever stuff. Anyway, you take a bunch of unflattering pictures of Ghost Girl and threaten to post them on Instagram if she doesn't leave you alone, so she fucks off after one final surreal sequence, and you get an ending that I didn't really understand, where Linda starts puking in the main room of the school, but also still makes it out and becomes like a superhero or some shit. I don't know. This went over my head. Like I said earlier, the game is mechanically simple and definitely shows its low budget in some areas, but overall it's an enjoyable experience and it lays a pretty good groundwork for expansion and refinement, something that developers also saw considering they came out with a sequel a few years later. Alongside this, there's also a sort of side game that was originally supposed to be an expansion for this one, but instead got upgraded into its own thing. I'm really excited to see how the latter two games iterate on the formula, so you can tune in. I don't know when. I don't either of these games. Ha! Got your ass! Whatever, I'll get to them whenever I get to them. For now, we're leaving it off at this initial entry and moving on to other things. If you're really into survival horror stuff and want a fun little game to spook the shit out of you, then definitely check this one out since it manages to overcome its jank and stand among its peers as a fairly decent entry in the genre. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go re-download that ghost hunting app that everyone had on their phones back in the day and see what strange entities I can find. Hey everybody, if you made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks. It means a whole lot. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, click the bell, all that standard YouTube algo stuff. And a big thank you to the patrons over on Patreon: Spec Teams 1 Slingshots, Joe Sneaks, Zorio, and the Gazer patron, as well as the members here on YouTube: Saiga, Grungles, Brigador24, and Just BW. Thanks a lot, y'all. But other than that, I'll see y'all in the next video. Goodbye.